Hello everybody, I'm Don Counts and welcome into Fayetteville Public Utilities Channel 6. And today we've got Greg Fleitz here, and Greg, met Greg just a few weeks ago when we did the Bearden Cemetery dedication, which you saw here on Channel 6. And if you didn't, that show, you'll see some bits and pieces of that during this program here. But Greg, that was a great ceremony we had. It was down around 910 Ardmore Highway. A lot of people asked me, they saw the show but didn't know exactly where that particular ceremony was taking place, and most people probably didn't know there was a cemetery even there. So that was a very interesting event. We're going to talk about that, but first of all, introduce yourself to Fayetteville-Lincoln County. Who is Greg Fleitz?
Well, my name is Greg Fleitz. I live up near Louisville, Kentucky in a town called LaGrange. My family, I'm from Louisville originally. About 30 years ago, first ventured into the area. My parents brought me down and we visited the Bearden Cemetery out off Ardmore Highway. I have two sons and am married. My two sons are 20 and 24. I've been married for 26 years, just had an anniversary. And as you said before, a lot of people probably didn't know a cemetery was there. When I first came here, the cemetery, the weeds and the bushes were so tall you couldn't even see it. So it's kind of stuck back there, so I'm sure there are some folks that didn't know it was there.
I met your sons, both of them, are they twins, or you said 24?
No, they're 20 and 24.
20 and 24, okay, gotcha. Well, they were young and eager and seemed to be right in there with you, so that was nice.
Well, we're kind of history buffs. We do a lot of family history research. I've been blessed through the years, a lot of information given to me, and doing some of my own research, kind of filling in the cracks. But very blessed. They very much love history, family history, and so they were very eager to help with the project.
Patrick and I, who's doing the camera work, we actually did a little tour over at the Masonic Lodge, and you're a Mason, and so Masons are really big on history, which we saw. We got to see a lot of history that day when we toured over there with Jim Armitage, and that was a very interesting thing.
Well, and the brothers of Andrew Jackson Lodge were very helpful to me. I was very fortunate to link up with Jim Armitage. And he's helped me a lot through this process, certainly helped me, him and his wife Chris, put on the dedication and coordinate it just due to the distance, me living in Louisville. But there were many people in the area that helped. Billy Langford of Langford Monument helped me through the process of trying to determine on the restoration of the cemetery how to do it. I had no experience in that, so he gave me a lot of advice and helped remove the monuments. Certainly other people in the community helped me through it. Higgins Funeral Home donated the tents that we had that were out there. And just local people throughout the community that were members of the Sons of Confederate Veterans, United Daughters of the Confederacy. The owner of the property, Bill Darby of Turfgrass America, was always there, helpful, let me have access, really do anything that I wanted to do there. So a lot of friendly people here that helped make this possible. One
thing that was interesting, the Masons did a ceremony. Explain what that ceremony was. It's almost like what you do at a burial, correct?
It was a Masonic funeral service. Jim Armitage had pulled out the archives from the lodge. The lodge is blessed to have archival data that goes back into the 1830s. And there was no record of Monroe, who was a member of the lodge at his time of burial, ever having a Masonic funeral service. So with the help of the brothers here, we did perform a Masonic funeral service. Any Mason, when they pass away, the family can request to have a Masonic funeral service, and it will be done. So very, I don't know how to say it, very cool that we were able to take and to do that, and it was very special.
Yeah. And as we've been talking about the Bearden Mill dedication, let's take a step back now and let's talk about who this person was and how you were connected, and let's just go from there because we have a lot of things to talk about. So we'll step back and since most people got to see that, and we're showing some of that along the way, plus we got some pictures, let's talk about who this person was.
The Bearden family immigrated from England in the 1600s. The first real information that I have on Beardens goes back to 1717 in Virginia. John Bearden, he had a son as well named John Bearden, who was born in 1744. And that's where really a lot of the information that I have comes from. That John Bearden, born in 1744, fought in the Revolutionary War, lived in the back country of South Carolina, was at the time they called them mounted militia, Rangers. He did not serve full time in the Revolutionary War, but did serve long enough to be able to draw a pension. He had two sons, William and Eli. Eli was the first to migrate from South Carolina into the Flat Creek area just north of here.
Sure.
And then in mid 1820s, John and his other son, William, they migrated over as well. William had a son named Alfred, and Alfred Bearden Family is the cemetery that we restored. Alfred was a gunsmith. He apprenticed through his uncle Pleasant Bearden in parts of what is today Marshall County. At the time it was Lincoln County. And there were a couple other families that lived in the area that were gunsmiths as well. Smiths, the Comptons, and the Beardens all were gunsmiths.
Wow.
And so Alfred, in that time period, during that late 1820s to 1830s, apprenticed to be a gunsmith. And his weapons, and I have one of his rifles here. It's kind of interesting. For years have been trying to acquire an Alfred Bearden rifle, and after I started the restoration process, I got notified, and I actually now have two.
Oh,
so
wow.
this is one of his rifles here, and it's interesting. I didn't know much about long rifles until I acquired the one and started talking to folks in the long rifle community. But each gunsmith, the way they built their guns was unique to them. So if you were a trader in long rifles and you looked at this rifle, immediately you know it was an Alfred Bearden rifle.
Wow.
The type of wood that he used that had the tiger striping maple, and the uniqueness of the trigger guard and especially the triggers. If a collector was to look at this rifle, he would.
Two triggers. It's very heavy too.
If a trader was to look at this, he would tell you immediately that it was an Alfred Bearden rifle.
Wow.
And it's pretty interesting because a lot of the long rifle traders, when you ask them if they have an Alfred Bearden rifle, they're like, no, but I would love to have one. So
Now what's the concept of two triggers?
Well, actually, one is a set trigger, and the other one is like a hair trigger.
Oh.
So you would pull back the this
Gotcha.
device here, set the trigger, and then the front one's just a little hair trigger. You would barely touch it, and it would go off.
Wow, that is so nice. How old is this gun right here?
Right now, I believe this gun was probably made in the 1840s.
Wow, wow, and probably worth a lot of money.
You know, in the long rifle community, they are. He also made pistols, and there's several of the pistols in the Tennessee Historical Museum in Nashville. Wow.
And he was from here.
And he was from here.
That is something. That is a great thing, and that's a great part of history that a lot of people, probably including myself, didn't know.
And there was a lot of the gunsmiths that lived in Lincoln County, other than Alfred Bearden.
That's interesting. And this gun probably was used during the wartime, right?
It could have been. It could have been. This one probably not, because it is still the flint. The flintlock, many of them would have been converted to the percussion cap.
Okay.
But Alfred was a gunsmith. He was also a farmer. He married Margaret Downing, who was from Williamson County in 1831. They had several children. Where they lived in, where I was telling you is today is Marshall County. In 1837, they sold the 250 acres and moved into Fayetteville, lived here for several years. had a few more children while they lived here. At that time, he joined the Masonic Lodge, and in 1843, he moved out to the current location of the cemetery at 910 Ardmore Highway.
Wow.
Him and his wife would have 11 children.
Wow.
10 of them lived into adulthood. And most of those children, 4 are buried in that cemetery. The rest are all buried in the local area.
Wow. So he lived in Fayetteville for some time?
For some time.
Do you know
he did,
where?
yes. You know, I do not know. That's
Okay.
one of those missing links, those little cracks that I haven't filled in yet, but hope to fill in.
Wow.
And lived until 1888, was very involved in Masonic Lodge. The other thing I found too, as I've researched records and data, is that a lot of legal documents, if you look at legal documents for Lincoln County from the 1850s to the 1880s, there's Alfred Bearden's name all over the place.
Wow.
He also was the enumerator in at least the 1850 and 1880 censuses.
Enumerator meaning?
He was in charge of the count.
Okay, gotcha.
The actual count for the
Sort of like
the
the census. Their census
for the census.
Sure.
Yes. Another interesting piece. He was also Lincoln County Superintendent of the Freedmen's Bureau in 1866.
Wow.
And so a lot of twists and turns to Alfred Bearden.
Wow.
I'm not sure where he got his education, but undoubtedly a well-educated man, well thought of in the community. Certainly a craftsman, and well thought of in Lincoln County.
Very good. You also had a sword that you had on display. You want to talk about that?
Well, one of Alfred's children, and he had 2 that served for the Confederate Army. Monroe Bearden and his brother L.J.E. Bearden, both that are buried in the cemetery. They enlisted in May of 1861 here in Lincoln County. They were called the Camargo Guards.
Wow.
And Monroe, when he enlisted, was a first lieutenant. Served in western Virginia, now called West Virginia, under Robert E. Lee early in the Civil War. Was transferred down to South Carolina. Following the Battle of Shiloh, there was a call to bring all the Tennessee troops back home. And so the 8th Tennessee, which he was a member of, was transported to Corinth, Mississippi. And during that time, in May of 1862, they had a reorganization of the Army. At that time, Monroe was promoted to captain and served as captain in Company E of the 8th Tennessee. Fought in Kentucky at Perryville, and then in Murfreesboro at the Battle of Stones River. His father had, once he was made a captain, had presented him with this sword.
Oh.
And on the hilt of the sword, he has engraved his name, Captain N.M. Bearden.
Wow.
And during the Battle of Stones River, Monroe was wounded and the sword was lost. Monroe actually was not evacuated with the Army of Tennessee. His father was in Fayetteville 2 days after the battle and learned that his son had been wounded.
Oh.
And made his way to Murfreesboro. Eventually, after about 3 weeks, Monroe did pass away due to his wounds. And they brought the body back here. It was buried March the 12th, 1863. They buried him at the cemetery there out on Ardmore Highway.
There was lots of details of his father writing, which, you know, I guess we go through life every day and we just let it go. But it's interesting that he took time to write some feelings that was they talked about that day, which was really neat.
He actually kept a farm journal, which probably most farmers had. And when he was in Murfreesboro, he started keeping a journal of what was happening there, and very moving statements in there. After about 2 weeks, it became pretty clear that Monroe was not going to survive. And he had to tell his son that he was not going to live. And one of the statements he makes is, you know, oh God, this is the most trying time of my life. And a few days later, he did note in there the exact time and place, January 22nd, 1863 at 4 p.m. that Monroe had passed away. They purchased a casket for him in Murfreesboro, had him placed in the casket, and then brought him back here home. One of the interesting pieces of the restoration process was that I knew there were brick burial vaults in the cemetery because in his diary he talks about the fact that due to weather conditions they could not bury him right away because they were building these in-ground burial vaults. And it was not until March the 12th that they were able to bury him.
Wow.
And so the sword, and there's a story on the sword as well, the sword actually was lost during the battle. And 20 years later, someone that was in Monroe's company learned of a gentleman in Atlanta that had the sword because it has his name on it. And the family was actually able to go back, purchase the sword. It was brought back here, taken to Nashville, replated. And today it's actually housed at the University of the South in Swanee in their archives. The last adult male that carried the Bearden surname was a chaplain at the University of the South, and in the 1940s donated to the University of the South. And they graciously allowed it to be brought back for our ceremony, which was pretty special too. That
was very nice. Actually, they stayed right there with it, so that's a pretty serious piece of archive for sure.
It is. They show it a lot there to the students in the classes that are studying the history of the war between the states.
It's interesting when you start looking back at history, the written word is just an incredible record. As today we're using our Blackberries and our iPhones and we're documenting things. I don't know how well that's going to be in the next 100 years, but that written word will hang around. It'll come back, and that's really nice that you've been able to find those things, and those kind of historical things are just chilling.
And it certainly for me, the family history that's been passed down was written and has been passed down. And the internet today, I will say, is a great resource, though,
it is.
For finding a lot of information. And I've been very fortunate to find a lot of information on the Bearden family through documents that have been scanned and saved stored.
That's great.
But the brick burial vault, and I'll go back to that.
Sure.
So I knew that there was at least some brick burial vaults in the cemetery. And what I found during the restoration process was that there was actually a row of 8 brick burial vaults in the front of the cemetery.
Were they mortared together and the whole 9 yards?
They were, and I guess I've got some pictures here of the cemetery before we started the restoration process, and kind of gives you an idea of what the cemetery looked like before we got started.
Wow.
I will say that the folks with Turfgrass America kept it mowed in that, but the real issue was the brick burial vaults, of course, were underground. Once the casket would be placed in the burial vault, a thin slate slab was put over the top of it. And then they would put 2 rows of bricks on top of the slate above where the walls were, and then on top of that they placed limestone slabs. And then on top of that they placed those tall obelisk markers on top of that.
Wow.
The problem was that over the years the limestone slabs started deteriorating.
Sure.
And the void between the limestone slabs and the piece of slate was allowing the limestone slabs to settle. And the fear was that if something wasn't done, that those tall monuments might fall over.
Sure.
And that's kind of what led us to the decision to take some kind of action to try to, I'll say restore, but really it was to create a foundation for those monuments to be able to rest on.
Did Billy Langford do that restoration there, or did he take those back?
He removed the, actually the monuments themselves we cleaned through his advice. He was, it's funny what bleach and a scrub brush will do, but that's basically all that needed to be done. And he removed the monuments for us so that we could take and get access to those limestone slabs.
Sure.
It really wasn't until we jackhammered out the limestone slabs that I learned, as we started digging down, that there were burial vaults all across the front.
Oh.
And then that led us to the point where we made the decision to pour a concrete slab over the top of the whole cemetery, sealing the vaults, and giving us a good foundation to put the monuments back on.
Right.
A lot of the fencing, there is a wrought iron fence around the cemetery. About half of the fencing we took back to Louisville. Over the last 100 years, it got beaten up pretty good, and repaired that, replaced a lot of the little missing pieces. But the majority of, and our goal was to do as much. Wanted to keep it as much originally as possible.
Sure.
So most all the fence is original, but we took it home, repaired it, rebent it back into place, brought it back down, reassembled it, took out the limestone slabs, put down rebar. We did put number 4 rebar at 9 inches. We have a 5-inch concrete slab. I don't think it's going to go anywhere anytime soon, and that's the whole plan. And then Billy came back out and put the monuments back up.
You know, that's been you spent a lot of time on that, and during that process, wasn't it? There was a tornado like came through that area.
It did. Actually, there's 2 of the tall obelisk monuments. One is for Alfred and his wife Margaret. The other is for Captain Monroe Bearden and his sister Mary. And the original limestone slabs we left because they were in good shape. That's where Monroe and Mary are buried. However, the tornado did come through that area in April of this year and actually blew the one monument over. And luckily we had taken all the limestone slabs surrounding those out, and it fell in dirt. And I think that maybe helped keeping it from breaking.
That's good.
So very fortunate that we didn't get any damage from that.
You spent a lot of time on doing this. This didn't happen overnight. You worked on it for how long did you say? 10 months?
8 months.
8 months. Okay.
8 months.
Wow.
And you know, it's a labor of love. The great thing about it is got to spend time with my sons.
Sure.
And the trips down here, about 5-hour drive down here, spend a lot of time talking and sharing and about family history, something that we love, and really do think that it's important. Through my research of family history, a lot of neglected cemeteries in the area. I mentioned the Flat Creek. Alfred's father and grandfather, my 3rd and 4th great grandfathers are buried there, and that's kind of where I'm heading next. The community cemetery there is unkept, and got some work to do there. It'd be a much larger project, but that's where I'm going to head to next. And because a lot of cemeteries under disrepair, and once they're gone, they're gone.
That's true.
Many of them, they're not mapped. There's no way to know who's buried in there once the markers are gone, knocked down, destroyed. So I think it's pretty important to do this if you can.
There's a lot of history there. You know, I know Patrick knows, and a lot of folks on Channel 6 knows. Gina Warren, my partner here, lives in the Flat Creek area. So there is a lot of history, and it's sort of a very rural area in that area for sure. And let's go back and talk about now this Alfred, the guy who did the gun, would be your great-grandfather?
My great-great-grandfather.
And then it goes up the line from there.
It does. My mother grew up in this community too, just really on the Alabama side of the line.
Sure.
Alfred's daughter Parthenia married a gentleman by the name of Henry Reynolds, and their son Rob Reynolds is my grandfather.
Wow.
And so still have, you know, like I was saying, ties to the area, and there are many folks that today may not know that they are Bearden descendants, but are.
I'm sure there's a lot of people who's going to be watching who's going to call and give me some information, so I'm just going to have to pass them on to you. So.
I tell you, if anybody has any questions, would like to know if they think they might be a Bearden descendant, please, I can give you my contact information. Would be love to help them if I could.
They can call me here and I'll get them hooked up to you. I appreciate you coming. I'm sure we could talk all day. We could talk about the Masons and everything else, but have we covered everything that was on your list? I think we did, didn't we?
I think that we have, and I would just like to again thank everybody in the Fayetteville area, the Huntsville area, that helped me through the process. Like I was telling you, there were some some great people here. And to be honest, I've spent some time in the community through this process, and just great people just in this area as a whole. Would have never been able to have done the restoration and specifically the dedication ceremony that we have. To have almost 100 people show up, and we had folks from Athens and Decatur, Alabama, Huntsville, and then Nashville, and then throughout this area that came down.
Sure.
And to have been able to have organized that, it would not have been possible without the help of the folks that I had mentioned earlier, and just the people of the community, and I really do appreciate all that help.
Yeah, had the reenactors there, and again the Masonic Lodge, and those folks come out, and that was something that I'm proud I had the opportunity to video for Channel 6, and proud I was there too. So Greg Fleitz, a Bearden descendant here, and we appreciate you coming by, and I know you came down just for this, and I wanted to talk to you that day that we had the thing, but it was just so much going on, and you were and so this worked out a whole lot better, and we got a lot of information out, and if anybody has any information that they'd like for me to get you hooked up with him, just call me here at FPU. Thank you very much for coming out. And
Thank you for your help.
Thank you very much. And we appreciate you watching here on Fayetteville Public Utilities Channel 6. I'm Don Counts, and we'll see you back in here next time.